Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Ritz. I am the Director of Product Marketing at Visible Thread. Thank you so much for joining us for our Prompt Engineering Strategies for EMEA Bid Professionals webinar. So today we are going to go through a few best practices for prompt engineering and prompting, set a nice foundation, talk about some prompt types, and then look at some specific examples. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to go through all of those. If by some chance we don't get through everything, I'll be happy to follow up with everybody and answer any questions that you have. And of course, as always, the folks at Visible Thread are available for follow-up conversations at your convenience. So again, let me jump in and thank everybody for joining us. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of the goals of the session. So the goals of what we want as far as takeaways are concerned. Additionally, some best practices when we're talking about prompting. We're talking about building a prompt library and creating your reference material. So we're going to start by reviewing effective prompt structure and best practices. So I know that we likely have folks on the call that are at different levels. So some may be very new to prompting or leveraging an LLM. Some may have a lot of experience there and are looking for, some potential tips, tricks, examples. So I think we'll have a little bit of everything for everyone, but we are going to start with a baseline just to review the basics and get off to a nice start. Then we're going to get into types of prompts and applications. So talk about some specific prompt types and some ways to apply those in different ways. So we'll cover 5 types today, and everything from ways to generate content to things that are more that are better suited for competitive analysis or idea generation, and kind of make this a more collaborative resource and collaborative process. We will walk through some screenshots of content creation in action. I'm using the VC Writer platform to show how these things look in practice and how we can create content and use reference files. And then, of course, like I said, Q&A, any questions, any feedback, anything that you have. I want to make this as interactive as possible. I know these webinar formats aren't super interactive, but would love to connect with you in the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. Talk about the goals of today's session. So like I said, we're going to start off with prompting best practices. So we're going to talk about the components that make up a good standard prompt, what to remember when we're prompting and generating content, and just kind of what are the universal items that make a good prompt and how do we build upon that. So the goal is to create a strong foundation that we can build upon and iterate upon to use in different areas, but then to create more complex and multi-step prompts. So different types and applications, we'll go over different types with different types of use case applications within the bid and tender process. Talk about some of the use cases. So where do these apply? What are some ways that you can leverage these effectively? Show you those examples. We do have, and I don't know if everybody saw this, but in the sign up, we noted that there will be a takeaway asset. As always, we will share the slides in recording, but then we're also going to make available an Excel file that has the sample prompts from the session today, as well as some additional sample prompts for you to add to your prompt library or your database and for you to play with on your own. And then I'll talk just briefly about the benefits of a prompt library and why having that resource is a good place to start and build from. Okay, so I want to talk about key elements of effective prompts. Here, we're really looking at laying a baseline and laying a foundation for making sure that we're communicating effectively with our LLM. For those that have some experience doing this, you know that your first kind of dive into the world of generating content was likely a bit confusing in the sense that you ask a question, the response isn't quite what you thought it would be. So there's always a level of variability when it comes to using generative AI, especially when we're generating content. But the better we can frame our requests and the more specific we can be with context and with different parameters, the better first results we can get. So we can give you a better starting point. You can begin to iterate and get a little bit closer to an end goal. You know, the goal, if we're talking about content creation, is getting off of the blank page and creating a starting point. So we want to give you the strongest foot forward in that starting point as possible. And we'll talk about some ways that we can do that. So, you know, what is prompt engineering? So prompt engineering is really an art and science, a combination of crafting proper instructions for the Gen AI tools that you're using to produce desired outcomes. So ultimately, you have an idea of what you'd like to produce, whether that is a, you know, tender response, whether that is competitive analysis, an internal process, technical content, whatever you're looking to produce, you have an idea of what that looks like. So the prompt really serves as the roadmap to direct the AI to the most relevant response, to get as closest to the desired outcome as you would like to be. So it is very important how you structure that and the information that you input. So go over here just some good basics to remember and that we should always be thinking about when we are creating prompts. So always be clear and give specific instructions. So we want to give specific instructions on our desired output. And again, we will walk through several examples of what this looks like in practice here in a few minutes, but just always kind of keep this in mind when you are prompting or when you are having a conversation. I like to say, I think it's a collaborative process, or should be looked at as a collaborative process. But when you are creating content, just keep these things in mind. So communicate only what is essential. So we want to avoid ambiguity and really think about if you were being asked to create this same type of content. So you have a request for a certain type of content or document. If you were being asked to do this, how would you like to be instructed? What are the critical elements that you need? And are there potential areas for confusion? So if there are potential areas for confusion or areas where you know might be a pitfall, you want to address those in the prompt and think about how you can simplify them and how you can get the most kind of direct feedback possible. Always consider style and tone. So if you prefer a professional tone, if this is technical documentation, if this is customer facing or educational, you can include that instruction and consider, you know, active versus passive voice. If there's a certain style you'd like to replicate from a reference material, a more creative response versus specific factual questions. So always think about setting the stage in your prompt and giving the AI the context of the tone, style, and just general feel you're looking at for your outcome. Context is key. So the information that you put in, whether that be in your prompt, whether that be reference information that you're using, that context that you provide is going to create the foundation for how relative and how referenceable your response is going to be. So you want to give specific instructions on formatting, length, structure. Again, like I said, we're going to look at some examples in a minute. And you'll see what that looks like in practice. But you want to explain any nuance that you would like the LLM to consider. Be specific about what you want to include, give instructions on the level of analysis. So are you looking for a summary? Are you looking for a deep dive? Are you looking for a technical review? So be specific on what you want to obtain. Again, think of this as giving instructions. So this shouldn't be something foreign. Prompting an LLM or communicating with an LLM shouldn't be a foreign idea. Really think about it like you are instructing a colleague or a coworker, or you're an instructor in a course. You're asking for a specific outcome. What would be the best way to give clear instructions to make sure that folks are getting to the desired result? You always want to consider your audience. So your preferred communication style, that can be depending on the audience, the industry, that can be customer specific, specific to your organization. And you want to give context in your prompt about the intended audience. So if this is, a tender response that you have a reviewer that is going to do an assessment on if this is customer facing or public facing material, if this is regulatory material. Consider all of that when you are prompting and when you're creating your content. Any details about evaluation, if there are certain evaluation criteria or certain things that are important to you, be considered or be highlighted. That's something you can highlight as well. And then you can assign personas. So if you say, I am a technical engineer, or you are, excuse me, not you are. So if you're assigning a role, so you say, you are a technical engineer, or you are a proposal reviewer. So giving a persona helps to shape the view that the AI is going to take when it's creating content and in deciding what to include. So the bottom line is all of those things to be considered, but a good prompt generally does three things. So contains a task or question for the AI to perform, frames the context of the request, and gives any relevant detail or constraints that the AI needs to create the most relevant output. So you can boil it down to those three things and kind of use that as a litmus test when you are creating prompts, particularly if you are creating prompts and you're not getting the outcome that you would like to see. So if you're way off from what you're expecting, really step back, think about the baseline. Are you hitting these three markers? And then think about the other things that we covered from a context, quality, framing, and then just general informational perspective. So a quick example. So I want to talk through a very basic prompt and using the kind of framework that we just laid out, how you can elaborate on that to get to a better first draft or a better start. So I have a very simple prompt here: create an audit report on the safety of the sizable nuclear power stations in Suffolk, England. So in this example, I gave instructions. So I want to create an audit report in the context. So this is where the facility is located. Now, LLMs contain a copious amount of information. Would likely have information that was published at some point in time, baked into the model on this on past safety of the power stations, past reports, information there. But I want to hone in on some specific things that I'm looking for because I have an idea of what I need to include in my report. So if I communicate that effectively, I'm going to get a better first draft. So how can I expand on this? So we have our basic prompt here, but then I've added the recipient. So the recipient is the Office for Nuclear Regulation. So adding the detail of the overseeing agency can be factored in if we think about preferences, and we can continue to enhance this to make sure that we are creating content for that specific audience. So to build on that, we have our facility, location, our recipient, so our audience, and then our focus. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on safety, quality, downtime, and environmental risk mitigation. So there's a lot of information out there. When you say safety, safety can be very broad, but there are some very specific items that we would like to include because these need to be included in the report that we're preparing. So then you can take it one step further. If we have an idea of what we want this to look like and how we want the information to be presented, I can contain all of that context and then say the response must have headings for each focus and be less than 2,500 words. So this is a good basic look at making sure that we have context, we're framing an audience, we're highlighting structure and what we want this to look like and giving some nuance for the AI to consider. So ultimately, this is a good basic starting point. You can continue to expand on this in the front end, or you can iterate on the back end. So I could add information about, headings, subheadings, the way I want things structured. I can focus in on specific things about, reasons for downtime, that kind of thing in my front end prompt. Or once I generate my first response, or if I run this prompt within my system, I could focus in on downtime. It may tell me about downtime, and then I'd like you to expand on the reasons for downtime. And historically, what did that look like? So look at this as a starting off point. It's a very, very unlikely and rare, unless it's a very specific ask a request that you're going to run a prompt, get a response, and that's your, end goal. You really need to go into this thinking about a collaborative process, and something that you're going to want to iterate on. You can leverage generative AI to iterate, to expand on ideas, to make changes to structure, types of language, tenses, all kinds of things that you can do in that collaborative process. And then, of course, you can always begin manual review, but the goal is to work in tandem and get to a point of action much more quickly. So talking about types of prompts, we've laid the foundation here for what is contained in a solid prompt. So if you will see as we go through these different types of prompts, all of them would meet those criteria that we laid out in the front end, the basic elements of a good prompt. But the way that they're structured and the information contained within are going to lead us in some different directions. So the first one that we'll cover are instructional prompts. So ultimately, instructional prompts are going to provide clear, concise commands. The more context you give, the more relevant the content that you're creating will be. So the goal of these prompts is to remove ambiguity and give a focused objective for the AI to achieve. So some characteristics, they're explicit. So we're clearly stating what should be accomplished, concise, so brief to the point, avoid unnecessary details. Now, when we say brief and to the point, that doesn't mean, they have to be 2 sentences, but what we're looking for are very specific instructions with desired outcomes. So making sure that we're specific on what we're looking for and removing any ambiguity or gray areas. And a lot of times very action oriented. So structured around verbs, write, summarize, analyze, and we want to guide to specific tasks. So the best practices for these are, if you want to improve the quality of the output, use clear instructions. Just make sure that you're being as clear as possible. Again, if you look at this and you think, if I were being given these instructions, would I be explicitly clear on what the outcome was or what I was looking to achieve? If the answer is no, then you might want to dial that in a bit. You want to define your context. So length, style, tone, target audience. Do that where it's necessary. You don't want to get too into the weeds, but the more context, direct context you can provide, the better. And then using action verbs at the start. Like I said, we want to, write a blog, write a response, respond to this question, summarize this article, that type of thing. So talking about where this is relevant. So the best kind of practical applications. Excellent for content generation, proposal content. If you're looking at questionnaires, content in either front end, back end of processes, process documentation, direct outcomes is what we're looking at here. So summaries, really good for, you have a large opportunity, you have a large contract that you want to summarize, get an overview, excellent for that. Factual explanations, structured outputs, so generating lists, outlines, reports, instructions. Those are all really good use cases for this type of prompt. So I want to look at an example. And what I have here is a basic prompt. Now, like I said, in the front end, everybody is going to get these after. So we have a file with all of these prompts that you can build on. And think about these basic prompts as just an outline for the framework that you can then add your information into. So what I've done here is I've created kind of a basic framework, and then I've done a Visible Thread specific example because at Visible Thread, we leverage VT Writer, leverage Gen AI in several different capacities. We use other generative platforms as well. And we're, bidding on proposals as well as, satisfying the needs of our customers. So with some good use cases that are relative. So I did these all kind of in a visible thread sense. You can see what they look like when they're populated with information. So our example here is create a 2,000-word executive summary for XYZ proposal. The document must have sections outlining customers' needs, proposed solutions, key benefits, and highlighting ABC company's capabilities. So if you look at the VT example, I gave that a little bit more color. So create a 2,000-word executive summary for the ITT for tender management software. The summary must outline the customer's needs for automated requirements identification, contractual risk assessment, past performance assessment, and content management. management, highlight how VT can effectively satisfy each need and our VT differentiators, create a section for each need with subsections for the customer's need, how we'll solve it, and our differentiators relative to the task, and include an overview paragraph on our technical approach. Now, the thing to mention in the example that I will show later is a prompt like this is going to be much more effective and relevant if you're referencing files. So if anybody has used ChatGPT, for instance, and you within your organizations may have proprietary LLMs, you may have different GPTs that you are leveraging. But if you've used just general ChatGPT, you know you can upload documents to reference. You can upload documents to reference. Within VT Writer, we have a capability called use files, and I'll show that a little bit later. But the goal is using the combination of the LLM and using reference material to ground this in your data and make it as relevant and as on target from a data perspective as possible. That's going to give you a much better starting off point. So keep that in mind, that these can be run generally in an LLM, but if we can reference data as well, that's going to give you a better outcome. And I'll show you what that looks like in my example in the end. So the next one that we'll jump onto is our contextual prompts. So contextual prompts are specific instructions, statements. You're looking to provide background information, clearly establish a scenario perspective, and look at an expertise or role that the AI should adopt when responding. So they're very similar to our instructional prompts, but you're just going to add context. So we're going to add context and add some nuance into the feedback. So you want, in this approach, you're going to get more accurate, detailed, relevant responses that can be more aligned with objectives. So again, similar to instructional prompts, which are going to add more context and nuance. So characteristics, we want to clearly define our context, be super specific, provide an audience and a scenario, which can improve your generated content. So in my example prompt, from our power station, we provided an audience or provided a reviewer, so who the document was intended for, but we could add more context on the reason. So this is a yearly safety review, or this is part of an audit. So you can give additional context to frame the way that your request is interpreted. Background information, and then we want to clearly state requirements or limitations. So make sure that anything that needs to be considered is added. And then we want to be very task-oriented, so results-oriented in the sense of we need the AI to know exactly what this response should accomplish. Best practices and things to remember here, we want to determine the specific domain or viewpoint that best matches the query. Clearly explain the background or the role that you want AI to adopt. So be a little more clear and a little more explicit, give more context to the role that you want AI to adopt and why. And then talk about any detailed information, nuance considerations that you want to include. So a good practical application for this, if you're doing an in-depth analysis, expert level explanations, technical explanations, thinking about nuanced scenarios and discussions. This is a great deeper dive if we're looking at creating SME content, domain specific guidance, more professional educational view responses. This is good framing for those type of requests. Looking at our example here, so you're a solution engineer creating offering for XYZ company, highlighting capabilities and addressing need A, need B, need C. Should use technical language but can't be overly complex. The response needs to be customer centric and focus on how our solution will solve problem A and problem B. So you have several bits of context here and a lot of framing on what our response needs to be from a focus perspective and a language perspective. So in my example, I've expanded on that and added the content. So you're a solution engineer at Visible Thread, create an offering for the European Medicines Agency, highlighting the core competencies of the VT Writer platform. So create a section with heading, summary, and bolded directives, on how Visible Thread will address writing quality, consistency of messaging, and adhere to agency style guides to support plain language initiatives. Additionally, add a section explaining how VT Insights will generate and provide data to support the platform's effectiveness at addressing these key needs. Response should be customer-centric and focus on how VT Writer will improve overall writing quality. So this is going to garner a much deeper response than some of our previous prompts. So we have added more detailed information on how we want the output to look. We want to really dig into specific items, so writing quality, consistency, style guides, plain language initiatives, and we want to tie back the data reporting to the support of those initiatives. So this could be a good example of generating this information, and what you'll see quite often with this type of prompt is that all of these things will be included in the response, but they may be a bit high level. That's a really great opportunity for you to expand into specific sections and ask for expansion of ideas. Really good starting point, gives you the framework that you're looking for, and then you can begin to expand on those ideas and expand on some of the sections that you'd like to go deeper into. So the next that we'll cover are comparative prompts. Now, the first two absolutely can be used in analysis, but really looking at content generation. The next couple are going to get into some expanded ideas and some different ways that you can apply prompts across multiple platforms. So if you're using a platform to generate content, if there are other AI-powered engines that you're using for competitive analysis, market analysis, generalized kind of research and idea generation, these are some good examples for that. So comparative prompts are kind of exactly what they say they are. So prompts are asking the AI to assess, contrast, compare, and analyze at least two concepts. It can be more, but you need at least two concepts. And you want to clarify, unique attributes, drawbacks, benefits, differentiators, all of the things that you're seeing one versus the other. So the AI does a really good job, and if you're prompting effectively, you can guide it to deliver, structured, comprehensive comparisons, really helping you to see nuanced differences in multiple topics, items, products, etc. So the prompts are really helpful when we're talking about decision-making, strategic planning, and again, content creation when you're looking at baseline and background research of content. So characteristics, again, at least two items to compare. They could be ideas, solutions, outcomes, processes, a lot of ways that you could apply this. It can be in a content creation avenue, or really excellent for idea generation, planning, those types of things. We want to make sure that we're using language that will identify areas where the two subjects are both alike and different, and then define the why. So we want to make sure that we aren't just seeing why the two things are different, what they have in common, what they don't, but why is that significant related to the topic at hand. Best practices, things to always remember. We want to clearly define our criteria for comparison. So what are we comparing? Is it functionality? Is it cost, efficiency, sustainability? What are we looking at comparing, and what are the things that are important for us to know? So instead of just a general, tell me about how these two are alike and different, tell me about how they differ in areas A, B, and C, and tell me about, benefits and drawbacks. We want to be very neutral in the language that we're using. So encouraging a balanced assessment. So you want to be very neutral. You're going to get the best response that way. And prompt for specific context or use cases. So again, instead of a very general overview, kind of define the why. Why do you need to know this? That will help with the that will help AI to define why the differences are significant. So if we're talking about applications, obviously analysis and evaluations are going to be, a huge use case for this. Competitive assessments, strategic assessments, assessments of your approach, win themes, differentiators, that type of thing. Educational resources, training materials, looking at supporting decisions and ideas generation, really good use cases there. So looking at an example. So in its simplest form, analyze the differences in solution A and solution B, identify similarities and differences, and explain how each will solve customer problem A and customer problem B. So that is the most, basic presentation of this type of prompt. We have asked for the differences in A and B and as related to these specific problems. So given the context of these are the problems we're looking to solve, how are A and B both going to approach that? So I have a prompt here, and this is actually the prompt that I've run in my example that I'll show later from BT Writer. Analyze the different approaches of BT Docs and BT Writer by referencing the core functionality of each platform. Identify similarities and differences, and explain how each will address risk identification, acronym management, and content creation. Please give an overview of how each platform will address each issue. So again, we have asked for a comparison of the two platforms. So we have two items here. We gave a little bit more context as far as the core functionality. So we want to get down to core functionality of each platform, identify how they are alike and different on these and how they will address these specific items. So we've given context and we've given kind of the why and the job. And you'll see when we generate the content, it's going to help the AI get to that end of the benefits and the drawbacks of each for these specific items. Great. So a couple more that we're going to cover here. The next one is sequential prompts. I think sequential prompts are really interesting because they are multifaceted and really helpful when you're doing research and using the AI and using your AI engine in a collaborative way. So ultimately, sequential prompts are a really great way to approach complex tasks. So you can approach a complex task or ask in a couple different ways. You can create very complex multi-step prompts, create a response, and like I said, sometimes you will get a response that contains everything that you're looking for, but is a bit high level in some of the areas. So then you create that first go, and then we'll need to expand. Another way to approach some of these complex asks, particularly if you're asking a question that has a lot of nuance and it's going to be tough to get down to the why or down to your final response. This is another way that you can approach that. So sequential prompts are going to break things down systematically. You're going to start with kind of a question or request. You're going to keep the steps very simple, and you're going to build on the answer each time, directing the AI down the path in the way that you want it to take. So essentially making sure that you're following the path appropriately and not taking any side steps into information that's not relevant, but then building on the response to continue to either get to the desired outcome or make what you're generating more robust. So looking at characteristics, always useful in the creation analysis of multi-step or complex processes. So when we look at the example, you'll see that we're really building off of our information. A step-by-step approach. Instead of a one broad swath, we are breaking this down into bite-sized chunks and approaching each step individually. With each step, this is the kind of key characteristic. We want to refine the output because it's going to build upon the last step. Best practices here, you want to make sure you're going to keep the commands direct and use limited concepts in each prompt or step. Make sure that you're logically building upon the previous output and correct course if the answer you receive is kind of going off base. This is a really good bonus of this type of prompting because you can correct course quickly. So it's not a lot of information where 80% of it's correct and you kind of have to piece out and start to do fixes. You can go step by step. If you prompt, you go off base, you can course correct and make sure that you're staying in the sequential order. Really easy to follow back as well. Looking at an example here. So 4 steps in both of these. So basic kind of overview. Step 1, create a summary of the past performance of XYZ company related to the delivery of product or service A. So we have a company and a product, summary of past performance. What we're going to do then is select one past contract. So we have a summary of the past performance. We're going to select a specific contract or specific item of performance and elaborate on where we best solve for problem A. So now we've talked about a product or service, we've looked at, these are the contracts that we have on this product or service. We want to dig into how we've solved for problem A. Okay, so we've done that. We have that output. So then we're going to say, in areas where we solve for problem A, did we also address problem B? So now we're going to find areas where we solve for problem A and address problem B. And then building on that, which areas did we solve for both problem A and B most effectively, and what was the position, what was our positioning in that solution and that offering? So that's a tough kind of ask in the front end. If we said, I want to know about, create a summary of past performance, identifying our this product or service. We want to talk about areas where we solve for problem A, but we also address problem B. If we did address both of them, how do we do it effectively, and what was the positioning in that offering? Because the positioning and how we spoke to it in that solution, spoke to that problem and spoke to that solution is what we're looking for. That's a lot to add in one, and you're likely going to get a high level response. This will help us to build and really dig into some of those details. So in practice, looks like this. Create a summary of projects in which a governmental agency used VT Writer. Choose a past contract, so I've identified a past contract, and elaborate on where we best address the need for data reporting related to overall writing quality. And areas where we effectively address writing quality, do we also support plain language initiatives? How do we deliver both data reporting and effectively improve writing quality? What was the positioning of that offering? So walking down the path to addressing product, problem, solution, outcome, and then what was our positioning. And then the last one we'll cover are collaborative prompts. So again, very straightforward. So with collaborative prompts, you're really looking to create a dynamic conversational partnership between the user and AI. So rather than asking to complete a task, you're looking for ideas, you're kind of, saying, let's put our heads together and identify some things I haven't seen before. So in this situation, we're going to put less context on the desired output. So it's not like an instructional or contextual prompt where you're going to really focus on the outcome that you're looking for, the structure, the end game. Here, we are allowing the AI to have a bit more onus and to suggest potential approaches that you might not have previously considered. So you want to ensure, in this instance, from a context perspective, that the AI knows any nuance or additional considerations, so you're getting the most valuable results. But again, this is going to be much more open-ended than some of the prompts that we discussed previously and some of the prompts when we're really focusing on content creation. It can be really helpful to assign a role or persona and to generate responses from a specific perspective. Best practices here, things to remember: clearly state initial objectives, make sure you're aligned. So like you would be going in, again, thinking about this in real world terms. If you were going into a session, you were looking to expand on ideas and brainstorm or workshop, you state kind of clear objectives in the front end to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everything that you're generating is going to be relevant. Be specific in follow-up questions. So you make sure that you're guiding the AI in the direction that you want to go and you don't get too far off track or, too far into the weeds. Be flexible. So again, this isn't something where I have a very clear view of what I'm looking for and I would like the AI to achieve that. Make it really an open-ended collaborative process, and you can, really start to develop ideas beyond your initial view. So good use cases or good kind of practical applications for this are content creation, but in the sense of like refining messaging. So we want to make sure that the messaging that we've created is approaching things effectively. So talking about your approach, looking at refining some of that messaging for specific needs or specific outcomes, idea generation, product solution development. So sometimes when you're looking at creating a tender response and you're looking at the development of your solution or offering, this is a good opportunity to idea share and enhance some of those things. Design collaboration, a scenario-based training. There are a lot of really cool ways that you can put these into practice. So example, I want to create a PQQ to assess the market and understand available solutions for problem A and problem B. Suggest how I should structure the request. It's a very basic view at it. With a little more context, I want to create a PQQ to assess the market and understand the solutions available to help my team manage bids more effectively. How should I structure the request, and what aspects of those platforms would be most helpful for a medium-sized team? So this is pretty open-ended. You are saying, I don't have a ton of information. I'm looking to do this, and based on the information that's out there, how should I structure that request to get the best response from potential vendors or potential participants? Okay. So I want to really quickly, when we're talking about all of these different types of prompts and how they can be leveraged, talk about the benefits to a prompt library. When I jump to my example here in a moment, you'll see the way that the VT Writer platform handles that. But generally, even if you're not using a platform that is managing baseline prompts or letting you reuse prompts or, edit dynamic prompts, any of that kind of stuff, even having an Excel file or anything that you can easily kind of copy and paste from, where you have different examples of prompts, where you have good framework, prompts with good framework that you can change information in and out of. It's a great practice to start because, number one, it allows you to save things that work well, that are giving you outputs that are advantageous, things that are structured well, things that are getting to the answer that you're looking for more quickly. Additionally, faster workflows creates guardrails and reduces sort of barrier to entry for new folks. So if you have new folks on your team, it's a good way to share and collaborate. And then it really just gives you a place, whether this is a team piece or whether this is something that you're working through on your own. So you're not reinventing the wheel every time. So you don't have to go through this process, particularly in some of the prompts that are more complex. If you have a good framework in place and you can then easily move information in and out, that's going to help you not only do things more quickly, but help to continue to iterate on the things that are working well and reference your own material and build your own library. Okay. So want to show a quick example. I am using VT Writer for these examples. I'll give you a quick orientation in the front end, and then we'll jump into one of those prompts in action. So this is a quick view of the Visible Thread prompt library, just to make that real world. Talking about it, but just what this looks like in practice. So in our world, because I'm going to pull from the prompt library in just a second, we have our shortcuts, so categories for different teams. I made a category here for a prompting webinar. It's my comparative prompt. You can select type, and then you have the prompt here that can be edited. I could add dynamic fields. If this were something that I was reusing for a different situation, I could add dynamic fields, highlight, bracket those, and it would give me instruction or kind of guidance on the things that I need to change in and out or content that I could use. But the great thing is that I can click on these and insert them every time. Like I said, the VT platform manages that, but if you are not using a platform that manages a prompt library, it is something that you can keep on your own, whether in an Excel file or a drive, and then just be able to reuse these. Okay. So I'm in VT Writer in creator mode. We have two modes, creator, scoring. Scoring is really the deterministic part of the platform that's handling grade level, readability, use of passive voice, complexity of writing, grammar, all of those types of things. But creator mode is where we are going to leverage our LLM and our reference files to create content, create and iterate content. So that comparative prompt, this is what the prompt library looks like in the system. So if I'm using VT Writer, I have all the prompts for my prompt library. I can click on one. So here I clicked on this comparative prompt, and then it immediately inserted my prompt into the box. So it's a easy shortcut to your workflow. And then if this was something that I had created and I was highlighting and inserting new information, I would have highlighted areas where I knew that I needed to change out information, whether that be the product, requesting agency, customer need, that type of thing. But this is the prompt that I pulled from our slide, and we're going to run it. So I selected my comparative prompt from the prompt library, and it's been inserted here. Now, earlier I referenced using documentation as reference material to help strengthen the quality of your response and ground it in data. So that is what I'm going to do. I could just run this prompt and leverage the LLM to give me the response, but I've asked for some specific things about the VT Docs and VT Writer platforms and specific questions on how they're addressing risk identification, acronym management, and content creation. I'm going to find those answers or find the reference material for those answers in our documents. So I want to reference those and have those considered as part of the response. So when you click on that use files, this is going to pop up. You're going to have the option local files from a computer, connection to SharePoint, anything that you have access to in SharePoint, any files or folders you can reference, and you can create collections with those that you, again, can reference again. So if I have specific technical material, documents related to certain products or services, I can create collections with those documents, and we're not reinventing the wheel every time. We can just reference back to that material and get to our content creation or research much more quickly. So I selected use files. And then I selected collections. I have my collections here. The ones that I'm going to reference are, I have a VT capability statement, how we handled RFP and the bid and tender lifecycle, our compliance security information, features, overviews, information here. So this is going to contain a lot of the reference material that I want to be prioritized when LLM is generating my response. So I curated this collection of documents, and this features and capabilities is always there. So any kind of question that I want to apply to that, if I'm doing, because sometimes I do work on our responses, so our RFI and RFP responses, and I have files here with IT information and documentation, our approach on deployment, our capability statements, all of that, and it makes it a lot easier to reference that information when responding to some of those Q&As. So I've applied that collection to this prompt. So what this is saying is that this is the prompt. I am leveraging the LLM, but then I would like to reference this collection of material and prioritize that when we're crafting a response. So then the system is going to run that and create a response. And what you see here, you see all our little reference bubbles. So it's not only pulling the information from my source documentation, it's giving me my sources and citing them in the material that's being created. So I can see where that information is coming from. You have a clear line back to your reference data. So you can do a sanity check and then really just see, is the information here accurate? So this really helps in overcoming hallucinations and grounding the content that you're creating in the relevant data. Now, in this next slide, I have inserted the new copy into my document. Like I said, you then can begin to iterate. So if I wanted to take a look at, we're saying that how VT Docs handles risk identification, we automate compliance matrices, offer custom dictionary and concept tracking. So I could highlight this, say, pull that in as a selection and say, I want you to expand on how we assess risk, how we handle risk identification, and specifically how we are managing contract risk, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can begin to expand on this output. So this is a good example of, I asked for several things in that prompt. All of that is here and all of it's outlined, all of it's outlined, but you do have some high level items. We have a couple bullet points here. I need more information than that. You can begin to expand and iterate on this. Okay, so that's the example of what that looks like in practice. I want to just talk briefly about takeaways, and then we can answer a few questions. So kind of final takeaways, the foundational information in the front end when we're talking about best practices and what a prompt should contain. It's always good to think back to those and use those as kind of a baseline of when you're creating prompts. Does it do these key things? And am I paying attention to context? Am I giving appropriate framing? Am I, assigning roles when needed? Am I being clear and concise? So making sure that you use those things to kind of underpin all of the work that you're doing. You can then, of course, begin to expand and iterate. We saw several examples today, expanded examples, multi-step, more complicated prompts. So once you have that foundation, you can really begin to play with those and grow on what you're doing. So experimenting with different prompts types for different jobs. I always say just get in there, start playing around. That's the way you really see what works. You see how you're getting the best results, the structure that's working most effectively. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. We covered, larger, more complex prompts. We covered sequential prompts where we're attacking piece by piece. So really just get in there and try out different things. I always like to remind folks to make sure that you're using, AI responsibly and ethically. And in that sense, I'm saying depending on your industry, depending on your organization, you may have rules around how you can leverage generative AI, the types of documents you're allowed to upload, what you're allowed to do with your proprietary information. So always keep those things in mind and err on the side of caution when uploading information or when using new technology. Always remember that the plan is to iterate. So you want to generate content, but it is unlikely and really not ideal in a lot of cases to get a full kind of response offhand. So if you have something very complex, breaking that down, iterating, expanding on specific areas can be the best approach. Focus on getting better starting points. So the goal with generating content specifically is not to run a prompt or run a series of prompts and get to an end goal. You need to trust but verify. You need to double check what you're writing. You're going to need to make sure that it's adhering to quality standards. You need to expand on some items. So you're really looking at creating a better starting point and getting yourself off of the blank page and expanding and exploring new ideas, and then kind of working from the draft that's created. And then continue to build your library of prompts. I say that over and over again, but no matter how you're keeping those, creating sort of a home for your prompts and working with those can be really effective as you're continuing to grow your knowledge and grow your knowledge database. Okay. So questions. I know we have a couple of questions in the chat, and if anybody else, we have a few minutes. If anybody else has a question, please feel free to jump in and add those to the chat. But I'll go ahead and answer the first couple that I have. So the first question is around the correct types of prompts. So how do you know which prompts to use in specific areas? Really, that's based on when we looked at, and we're going to share these slides, so that's some good reference material, but look at what the practical applications are as well as what you're looking to see. So in our earlier prompts, when we talked about instructional prompts, contextual prompts, those were situations where you're going to have a very clear outcome of what you're looking to get. So I know that this is what I need my output to look like. So I'm creating a specific process. I have something that's a bit more regimented. There's very specific ideas that I want to cover or things that I want to kind of dive into in what I'm creating. So in that instance, you're going to lean more into instructional, contextual prompts that are more rigid and have a very clear instruction of the output. When you don't know, or you're looking for idea generation versus content generation, you're looking for comparative analysis, you're trying to discover something new, those are areas where you can really lean into the collaborative pieces and those items that you can identify, oh, there might be something new that I don't know, and that is going to be a much more open-ended type of prompting. Okay, we got a question. Would it be a good idea to prompt an AI on how to prompt another AI? You absolutely can. I say that it's all trial and error. You can ask really any question and see if you get a good response or if there's something to work with or not. I say if you're not sure, just go ahead and give it a try. But absolutely, because there are different types of AI. So there are different types of AI, different types of models, depending on what you're looking for, different types of platforms. Some are better at creating content. Some are better at competitive analysis and market analysis. Others are better at, managing data and that type of thing. So if you are using a new platform, I absolutely will reference and ask questions about best practices for using this type of platform, best practices for using this type of AI. It can be a tool for not just creating content, a tool for research, tool for learning, and give you a really great baseline. What I always say is just be aware of hallucinations and aware that you need to always kind of trust but verify. Look at it as a suggestion and a starting point, not an end-all be-all, because sometimes AI can be very good at giving very convincing wrong answers. So always make sure that you're verifying, but absolutely, if you're using a new technology and you want to learn more about it, using an AI engine to ask questions is a great place to start. Okay, I have a question about the reference material. Yes, we are going to share the slides. So we'll share the slides and recording as well as the prompts. So in a Excel file, you'll receive the prompts, and I'll add both of those on each slide are in there. So the basic prompt framework and the more broad kind of visible thread specific prompt. And in those, I did highlight the areas in purple that you could change out information. So information that I added that was specific to visible thread or specific to the outcome that I was looking for, I highlighted those so you knew where you could change that in and out and use those differently. Also on there are a few additional prompts from my prompt library that address creating specific types of procedural documents, general questions. There are 5, 6, 7 other ones that I think are effective, and those will be there as well. You'll receive that in an email after with the recording and the slides. Time for one more. I'm going to answer this last question. So the last question we have is around applying best practices and applying prompts. So how can we make sure that we're applying best practices to get the best results? So ultimately, again, I want to reiterate, when you're thinking about anything, and not just leveraging Gen AI, but leveraging AI or any type of automation in your process, what you want to do is really think about how you handle this manually. So if you're automating steps of, assessing risk in a solicitation document or a contract, if you are optimizing content creation through generative AI, if you're optimizing, pipeline management or opportunity management through a certain AI platform, really think about how you would do that manually. So how would I do this if I were going to give instructions to someone, if I were having a collaborative session, if I were creating a process manually or instructing someone to create a process manually? What would that look like? And what would those instructions be? And when you're looking at your prompts and creating your prompts, read them and say, if I were asked to do this, would I have follow-up questions? Would I have follow-up questions? Do I have any gray areas here, areas for interpretation that would take this off track? And that's a great way to level set and quality check your prompts and anything that you're doing from an AI perspective where you're prompting. So prompts, if you are doing, research, if you're generating content, whatever you're looking to do, really take a step back. Don't look at it as a brand new thing. Look at it just as another kind of method of communication. So just like you were communicating with a colleague, make sure that while it may be structured to suit generative AI and suit, a prompting framework, make sure that the instructions are clear and concise, and this is something that you would follow because that will give you the best result. Okay, well, we are at time. Again, thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time. You'll see that follow-up information coming soon. So the Excel file with the prompts, as well as the slides and reference materials and recording. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow up when you get the follow-up information, connect back with us, and love to connect, answer any questions that you have. And then if there are any follow-up conversations or anything you need, we're always here. And again, really appreciate you taking the time, and have a lovely rest of your week and weekend. Thank you so much. Bye.